Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where I profile agents of growth and transformation in education today. Each guest shares their highs, their lows, their passions, their goals, and the resources that are shaping their thinking and inspiring their practice. For show notes and links from each episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, please do subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. This episode is brought to you by ClassTime.com, an assessment platform that delivers learning insights, giving you more time to teach. ClassTime helps you gain immediate visibility of your students' learning progress, build engaging lessons, share with other teachers, and create your own tech-enabled questions to complement your lesson plans. ClassTime.com also helps you engage all students with collaborative challenges and puzzles that make fun an integral part of the learning experience. Check out ClassTime.com and start for free today. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's meet today's guest. Today, I'm speaking with Nina Pak-Louie. Nina has taught at the middle and high school levels, and today she instructs pre-service teachers at the School of Education at Trinity Western University in Langley, BC, Canada. Nina views teaching as a sacred calling, and she's dedicated to inspiring and equipping future teachers to be caring, competent, inclusive, and reflective. She designs and facilitates meaningful learning experiences that intentionally connect theory to practice. You can follow Nina on Twitter at npaklouie, that's Npaklui. Visit her website at ninapaklouie.com and connect with her on LinkedIn as well. Nina, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
I'm ready. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, Nina, I'm so excited. We can actually say that we are friends. We've shared so many solid education conversations already, and I'm so glad to be able to engage with you on my show and share some of your insights with listeners. I'm genuinely excited to get into this. But first of all, why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your current context in education? What does that look like for you?
Okay, so current context, I live in Surrey. I work in Langley, BC, like you said, in the School of Education at Trinity Western University. We have a concurrent 5-year education program, and I teach mostly the undergraduate student. At the university, our undergraduate and graduate students are from all over the world. Students come from across Canada. We have a lot of students from the United States, and we also have a good representation of international students. We have a campus in Richmond, BC, as well as the Langley campus. So learning happens face-to-face and online, but the teacher education program happens mostly face-to-face at the Langley campus. I'm currently teaching undergraduate students in curriculum design, assessment, and evaluation for learning. And I also oversee the undergraduate practicums and facilitate monthly seminars. I also do academic advising for our teacher education students. And then last year, I supervised a few teacher candidates in the professional year program. And this year, instead of supervising, I'm taking a chance on research. When the spring semester ends and I'm off in May and June, I sometimes consult, and I also TOC in the Surrey School District.
Nina, that is a very full package, and knowing you as I do, I know you are fully engaged in all of those areas that you mentioned. We connected briefly at an assessment conference, and we'll come back to that a little bit later in our conversation. I know you mentioned assessment in your list of current activities, and I also look forward to hearing more about your research. I know that will be sort of a new next step for you as well. But first of all, Nina, it is story time. And if you've listened to the podcast at all, you know what comes next. Please share with us about a low moment or some kind of an experience of adversity that you faced in your teaching or education career, and describe how you overcame it.
Okay. A few years ago, I struggled with mental health in the workplace. Although I love and still love my former school community and committed myself to serving and leading the student body wholeheartedly, I didn't respond well to some of the systemic barriers. that I faced when I was a classroom teacher, I had more autonomy and it felt much easier to bring vision to reality. But in the recent role that I had in the high school, it was really difficult to align my educational values and beliefs with practice. So as a leader, the division for growth and development were so clear, and I depended too much on myself to make the vision become a reality. I struggled a lot with not being able to maintain or sustain integrity, which led to burnout. After giving myself an extended timeout, meaning I took a short leave of absence, and with a lot of time for reflection, I realized my struggles were rooted within myself. So I stopped blaming external factors. So having that space and time to examine my inner landscape, it was a lot of hard work, but I grew and learned to be kinder to myself, to show myself more grace and love, and become more patient with others, and accept that learning and change, like systemic change, takes a long time. And perfectionism, I really struggle with perfectionism. I know that it is a thief of joy, and personally, it always prevents me from reaching my full potential. So when I'm unhealthy, and the negative and critical voices in my head are louder, and I'm learning to recognize lies and look to the evidence of my work and my life that says otherwise. So for the first time in my career during that time, I took a short medical leave to care for my well-being. I sought support from friends and family and professionals, and it allowed me to rest, recalibrate, reflect, and heal. And looking back, it was the best decision and a wonderful time to gain some clarity and direction. That was a hard time.
Well, thank you for sharing it, Nina. And there are so many different directions we could go. We don't have time to explore them all here, but I think just what you shared is so valuable. It's a story that comes up from different places, and it always looks different, right? Depending on the person and the context. But I like how you put it in terms of vision. I mean, you had all of this vision for growth and development. And sometimes functioning on our own, we just can't bring it fully to the reality that we hope. And sometimes some of those systemic barriers, whether it's policy, whether it's leadership, whether it's colleagues or students, or as you put it, within ourselves, sometimes those things just don't allow us to get there. And we have to sort of make our peace with that one way or another. And I like the fact that you did take that time away and it gave you that space to redefine what you are all about and give you that clarity. It reminds me a lot of a story Janelle McLaughlin shared a few episodes ago. So thank you again for sharing that. That is really, really good. And I hope for someone listening out there, I mean, we are at the beginning of a school year. So I hope no one out there is in that position of considering taking a step away from their position at this stage of affairs. But,
Yeah.
I think the broader lesson, again, is sometimes we don't see the forest for the trees, and sometimes that time away is exactly what we need. Nina, I had the pleasure of joining you at the Kaplan conference last year on assessment for learning, and we had so many inspiring conversations about gradeless assessment in the weeks and months since. You are super passionate about this topic. I get energized, Nina, every time we talk, and you share new perspectives and resources with me. So I'm sure you could talk for hours on this topic alone, but in your mind, what's at the core of this shift from traditional assessment practices to going gradeless? And what do the skeptics need to understand?
Those are big questions. I don't know if I can answer all of them. Assessment is such a big topic, but I'll do my best. This is sort of what I've gained from student perspective, that the emphasis on formative assessment is new to them. The stories that they share with me about their own assessment story included hard deadlines and grades being used to reward and or punish them.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard stories about how students didn't have many chances to refine or redesign, revise, or redo. They've also shared with me that feedback was usually given at the end of a learning cycle. So overall, from the student teachers that I teach, what they've shared with me is they've had some positive experiences with assessment, but they've shared more negative associations with it. And they expressed how assessment has impacted how they view themselves, like their identity and their self-worth. For administrators that I've worked with, they've shared, they've had some space and time to learn and implement and reflect on assessment, while some other administrators, they do not have that kind of time. Many of them desire to support teachers in developing sound assessment practices, and they do understand that assessment and instruction are directly related. And yeah, I understand that it's a time right now in BC where schools are employing assessment for learning strategies and trying to use different methods and tools. But the challenges that are being faced is like there's a lot of demands, a little time for professional learning, and then it's going to take time to have a shared understanding of assessment literacy. And I believe we are in a paradigm shift. And I guess the assessment, I'm understanding that we're all on a learning journey together. I am also learning and gaining more of an in-depth understanding of assessment. That's new for me as well. And so just some quotes like Katie White. She's the author of the book, Softening the Edges, Assessment Practices that Honor K-12 Teachers and Learners. There's a lot of quotes that stand out to me. One in particular, she says, continual intention and active capturing learning in the moment and making inferences about the degree of a learner's understanding in relation to a goal happens over time. And I think that is new. Well, it's new for me compared to like how I used to assess the students in my classroom. And that also mirrors what Dylan Williams says in his research. He says, for assessment to be primarily embedded in the learning cycle, it must remain formative. He also says that all activities undertaken by teachers and or by students which provide information to be used as feedback to modify teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. And I guess just these words like learning is happening over time, that we have intentional goal setting, and that we act on the feedback that we are given by our students, and then students also act on the feedback given to them, and that there's more intentional time of reflection as students learn, they're adjusting, and I bolded like trying again, being able to try again. And, with summative assessment, I've learned from my readings and just in my practice, like students need to be ready to engage in summative assessment. So if those are moments when we measure progress, consistency, and independent proficiency in relation to the goals, then students need to be ready to be able to do that. I'm going to use a story as an example, and I have permission from the student to share it. In my assessment class, I have like certain objectives for the course, and I'm hoping that by the end of the course, the students have gained some skills and knowledge about assessment practices. And then I have like a series of summative assessments for them to demonstrate to me their proficiency. And then through my formative assessment practices, whether it was like observation or having a conversation with students, giving them like a self-assessment tool to gauge where are they at in their learning journey, finding out, do you feel ready? Like, are you feeling ready to move on to the design phase? If not, then like, how do we need to close that gap? Just doing or implementing those types of formative assessment strategies, I learned that this one student in particular was feeling anxious, not ready. And I learned in our conversation that from a previous course, the student wasn't even ready to engage in this course. So I had to make a decision, do I make this person plow through and do what everyone else is doing, or be flexible and adaptable and personalize the learning for him? So we decided to personalize it for him, and I redesigned the assessment plan for this one particular student. That meant learning how to create a unit again and starting from base one, having more meetings with the students to check in. And over the course of the semester, the student did reach readiness. And when that student reached readiness, thankfully that student reached readiness, they were able to engage in some of those other summative assessments that the other students were engaging in too. And I think if I hadn't done that, and the student has explained to me that if I wasn't willing to be flexible and personalize the learning journey for the student, they wouldn't have made it. They wouldn't have been successful in the learning, and probably they would have failed.
And I think that's an overarching theme that I hear coming through what you're saying is that formative assessment moves us to, formative assessment, good assessment practices are more work. They take more time and they take more
It is.
energy because we are actively, and I know Dylan William writes about this. I've read at least one of his books that he talks about short cycle, formative assessment, frequent check-ins, frequent checks for understanding, and adapting our teaching and our instruction accordingly. And so the same way that you adjusted the course requirements for that student, I think thinking about the K to 12 classroom environment, we have that same responsibility because traditional assessment, in my thinking, has almost prided itself or applauded itself for being so rigid and so unchanging and nonconformist and no, you must fit within this framework. But that doesn't meet every learner, does it? And it does leave learners behind.
Yes, and I didn't want to leave the learner who is a future teacher behind. And I wanted to model a formative assessment practice that really knows, like I wanted to know my learner. And by knowing the learner, I knew the path forward for this student. So if I didn't really get to know the learner and the needs and tap into what was truly happening, like where they were at in the learning journey, I wouldn't even have known how to adapt and personalize the rest of the course for this student.
That is such a cool story. And already, I think maybe 10, 20 years ago, that student would have not made it. They might have dropped out of the program. They certainly wouldn't have made it through your course. And so I think this is a positive thing in terms of education evolving in a positive way to just meet more learners exactly where they are. Now, let's talk about summative assessment, Nina. I heard a comment this morning from one of my dear friends in a Voxer group. And he said, it's actually a Voxer group all about gradeless assessment. We'll have to get you in there at some point. But he said, I hate tests. And so talk about summative assessments. How should we look at summative assessments? I think they still have a place. What value do you think they serve in the classroom today?
Okay, so summative assessment, they do have a place. It's meant to measure student learning and use it as a tool for us, like at a point in time, to celebrate their hard work, to celebrate what they have learned or what they are able to do. Sometimes for me, like the summative assessment turns into formative assessment if the student has another opportunity to demonstrate their learning. Like in the past, like my grade book was filled with numbers for each summative, and then I calculated a single score after averaging
Right.
and weighting, and I depended on the grade book to convert and tell me if the learner is proficient or not. Yeah, the summative still to me is like a rich performance task that will demonstrate to me the complete learning standards that we're aiming for. Like we're aiming to achieve. But my grade book is a little bit more of like a sketch. Like it's not fixed anymore.
Yeah, no, for sure. What I hear is the grade book tells a story and it articulates a journey, and it's not some kind of mathematical linear instrument the way maybe it was 10 or 20 years ago.
But one more thing is want to move towards summative practices that validate growth. I also want to move towards summative practices that truly capture the desired learning or like the hopes for learning that we had intended for at the beginning of the learning journey, and to decide on like what kind of summative assessment students will engage in. To me, that really depends on the type of learning target or like the type of standard. So for example, if the targets are knowledge, factual knowledge, you can use a test, a multiple choice, true or false. But if it's deeper levels of engaging with the learning or deeper levels of thinking or I don't know, analyzing or demonstrating or evaluating or assessing, I think the kind of learning targets would inform us of the design of the summative assessment.
So good. First of all, I need to say this, that I sort of made a false equivalence between summative assessment and tests. And there are other forms of summative assessment, so I should know better than to do that. But I mean, tests are just a piece of that, right? And coming from an environment where we're aiming for project-based learning, obviously projects and other student artifacts can take the place of summative assessment. So tests are not the only way to get there. But something you said is that a summative assessment can become a formative assessment if we allow a redo or a revision or a rewrite or whatever it happens to be. And I love that idea that, it's all flexible and anything can be negotiated. And as much as we can, I mean, something that keeps coming back from formative assessment or assessment for learning is that we want to encourage multiple iterations. So we want to close that door as seldom as possible, I think. So Nina, you've talked about formative assessment for learning, and some of what that shift looks like. Talk to us about why we assess. What is the purpose of assessment in your mind?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to quote Katie White. In her book, she says that assessment is something, and I agree with Katie, assessment is something we're always doing. So from diagnostic to formative, through feedback, relearning, observing, discussing, demonstrating learning. It's essential to supporting the human. And then I want to elaborate on that. I was telling a colleague the other day that assessment, the way that I assess is being human. Does that make sense? The way that I assess is a way for me to show humanity, meaning that achieving in school is not just about doing the work to accumulate points and letter grade. That school is about learning and becoming. Like as a teacher, we do assess academic growth, we are assessing behaviors, we assess abilities to apply strategies. We're just assessing a variety of things. But we also assess students' willingness to take risks and their ability to work well with others. And so I'm kind of like moving towards separating academic growth and behaviors, and that the way that I assess, I want my students to know that they can make mistakes, and if they need to try again to improve, that they have the opportunity to do that. So like I'm asking myself, are we here to ensure students are taught, or are we here to ensure that our students learn? I'm also asking myself, are we here to measure only past learning or to support future learning? Is our work building or creating barriers, or like building walls and documenting who climbs over them? Or am I making sure that my learners have the tools and support to push through the barriers that are in front of them? Like I am interested in figuring out what those barriers are through my assessment practices so that they can be successful in learning. And I want to be really clear. Like my goal is I want to be clear about our reason for assessing. Like, why am I assessing? And I want to work towards it being more inclusive, proactive, accessible for students. If I know why I'm assessing, and if I can share that intent with my students, and this is not a prediction, like I've experienced it for myself in my own classroom space at the post-secondary level, they feel emotionally safe to take the risks and the challenges, and that they also feel the safety to advocate for themselves if they need support and more tools to learn. Like we're working more together as a team instead of having this relationship of power and students needing to be compliant. Like I don't want students to think that they need to be compliant. I want to be on this learning journey with them through the assessment practice.
Wow, so many gems there, Nina. And, I love what you had to say about humanity and the fact that it really isn't about the points. A word that I've been using lately is currency or wages. I view the traditional assessment paradigm as we will pay you if you work hard and you color within the lines, and if you don't color within the lines, we will dock your pay. And I think about the metaphors of learning to ride a bike, or in my case, I think about learning to drive standard, to drive stick shift. And in both cases, I had adults, in the case of the bike, it was my dad. And in the case of learning to drive stick, it was my uncle. And I think, man, if we had gone out the first or the second or even the third try, and I had tried those objectives, I had tried to meet those standards of riding a bicycle without training wheels or driving a vehicle using stick shift, and they had said, you've had the practice, you're not meeting the standard, this is a fail, let's go back home. Well, that would have been the end of that story. And I may never have tried. I mean, who knows, right? These are hypotheticals. But my point is, I may have just walked away and given up those skills. But we all know just from human experience that when a child learns to ride a bike, they need a lot of room, a lot of attempts, a lot of opportunity, time and opportunities to fail. And it needs to be a safe environment. And as parents, we give coaching, we give feedback, but we don't call them a failure. We don't give them some kind of a label that's just not going to be helpful, as you put it, for future learning. And I love that so much. So thank you, Nina. A lot to think about there. Like I said, Nina, you and I could talk for hours. I know we will going forward, but let's move on. Nina, in your current position, you teach and train pre-service teachers. Talk about how the needs of teachers in training have changed from when you and I were in our own teacher training 20 odd years ago. We won't mention exactly how many years, right? But I think of one of my past guests, Dr. Sam Festich, who is in the same position. And I know she would say things are probably a little different than they were for us. So why don't you talk about how the needs of teachers in training have changed today?
Well, I mean, I can only base my comments on experience. And when I was a pre-service teacher, I was a very self-motivated, self-driven pre-service teacher who had some professional experience working in a school. I mean, I felt supported by my mentor teacher to try new ideas. I had a faculty associate who really encouraged me to take risks, and I flourished under that kind of guidance. And I just remember the freedom, even as a pre-service teacher, to try new ideas. I think that that space is still similar today. Like our student teachers, our pre-service and teacher candidates, they need quality mentors. Finding those quality mentors and partnering with them, that's not really in my scope of the work, but I do think that that's a need, like finding a quality mentor. Because sometimes what they learn in teacher ed and then often what they maybe experience in the field, there's tension or there's dualism happening, or maybe they're not sometimes seeing, well, I'm not sometimes seeing what I'm learning at school. And so, yeah, just having needing a mentor and teacher educators to work together and create a space for them to explore and discover. I also think that, like me and others, is having a space where they can more intentionally connect coursework to fieldwork, like connecting theory to practice, and always kind of going back to why am I doing what I'm doing? So often I remember as a pre-service teacher, I focused a lot on what can I do? What strategies could I implement? What method could I use this time in my lesson plan? It was only in that time of reflection, I had only very, very little time to think why am I doing what we're doing? I do think that they need some space to think about the whys, even as a pre-service teacher. And because it's such an exciting time to be in education in BC, so much is happening, not just in assessment. Assessment is a big, big thing. But, with Indigenous education, SOGI curriculum, thoughts on inclusion, if I was a pre-service teacher today, I think I would feel overwhelmed, really overwhelmed. And so from my observations, I see that could manifest in, my conversations in my office, oh, this is too much. I can't be everything to everyone, or how can I be expected to implement everything during my practicum. And so instead, just reminding them that becoming a teacher, like we are committing to like lifelong learning. Like we are a professional learner. And in this stage of their learning, are you open to learning? Are you open to trying one or two new ideas? You don't need to have it all or like be able to do it all. That, we want to equip them to be a learner and to continue learning and have a sense of confidence and efficacy to continue to try and be a risk taker in their practice. Does that make sense?
That so makes sense. The word that was coming through my mind was posture. I mean, you mentioned all of these movements that are running rampant through education. So many of them good, by the way. So many of them are awesome. But pedagogy is shifting fast. Technology is changing quickly. Ideals, values, there's a lot that is moving and it's an exciting time. But I think, when I look back at my own practicum, I mean, education looks completely different. I remember one of my mentor teachers had libraries of binders and filing cabinets, and he was ready to turn them over to me. And, those filing cabinets were full of overhead transparencies and newspaper clippings and black line masters that I could photocopy. And, I wouldn't use any of that today. I don't have any of that. And so,
that's really interesting. That wasn't my experience at all. For me, a quality mentor teacher is someone who is open to learning, someone who's saying, okay, a lot is happening right now, a lot is shifting, and I'm learning. And we're going to learn together, and let's try things out together and see how it goes and reflect. That's a quality mentor.
Yes. Well, that's the growth mindset, right? And that's taking risks in front of your students, and yes, even in front of student teachers. So that's very cool. I mean, a lot has changed, but a lot remains the same, is kind of what I'm hearing. And it's funny, it always comes back to relationships, doesn't it?
Yeah, they want to feel supported. They want to feel heard.
So good. Now, Nina, I know that equity and inclusion in education are passions for you. You just mentioned equity in your last comments. We've talked about the fact that so many schools struggle with this problem of staff populations that do not look like their student populations. And that's definitely the case at the school where I'm teaching today. So in school communities where often, unfortunately, it's Caucasians that are overrepresented and minorities that are underrepresented, what can schools in this position do to better serve their cultural minorities and make sure that every learner feels seen, heard, and included?
Yeah, the lens of equity I am most concerned about is usually access to learning. So I'm constantly reflecting on or chewing on student feedback to see if the learning experiences in my classroom were accessible to them. And like I said earlier, like, were there any barriers that limited students from learning, and how I could minimize those barriers next time. But then the question that you ask is a really good question. Yeah, my stance towards that question is I do believe that representation of your student body in faculty is really important, but I haven't had a lot of experience with that. Meaning, when I was a student back in the day, I was taught by educators who didn't look like me and who were probably unable to identify with my own ancestral heritage, which is Korean. I do wonder what that would have been like. And I wonder how it would have affected my learning journey, as well as, my understanding of identity. Like, as a student who went to a school where I was a visible minority, I tell my friends, I don't even think I realized I was Korean or looked different until grade 4, until someone pointed out to me facial features that wasn't like everybody else. Yeah, so I don't have a lot of experience being taught by educators who look like me, so I don't really know what that would have been like. I do wonder how that would have affected my learning journey. Same goes for being a member of faculty in the K-12 system. As a member, as a teacher in the school that I worked at, I've always been a visible minority at the institution I worked for. So that experience, even though the student population changed and the demographics of the students changed, the faculty representation, I was still visible. My experience has always been being a visible minority, whether it's being a learner or being a faculty member. And the same goes for leaders. I haven't worked with leaders that are, that look like me. So yeah, I would be delighted to see progress in this area and see faculty members and leadership represent the diverse student population. I do think representation is important. I think that it can provide students a way to access connection to identity in a different way. Or maybe when decisions are made or there's dialogue happening in a room, you can consider maybe more diverse perspectives or a different lens, right?
First of all, I'm just going to say I feel really unfit to speak to this. So there's an admission, but it is an area that I know I need to grow in and I want to expand my vision. I mean, I walk around with these sort of white man blinders on. And so I think about my boys here at home. They are half Filipino, and I doubt they've ever had a Filipino teacher, for example. I mean, just thinking back through the ones that I can recall, I don't think that's been the case. I know they've had minorities in the classroom. Thank God for that. But yeah, we do. I mean, I think the obvious answer to my question, and you addressed it, is yes, in terms of our hiring policies, start there. And let's try to hire a composition that resembles our student population. It may seem obvious, but I think that's a common sense strategy. And I think of my good friend Joshua Stamper down in Frisco, Texas. And that's one of his mandates, is to try to match the teaching team with the student population. But I think beyond that, and I can hear you wrestling with the same with the same question, is we have students from so many different cultural backgrounds. How can we make sure that our mentality, our ethos, our community values match all of those communities as well, those smaller communities represented?
It's the same stance. Get to know your students. Listen, whatever they are experiencing at home, that is their culture. And there's probably more shared understanding than differences, but at the same time, I do believe representation is important, but representation with quality leaders.
This is an issue that I think thousands of schools across North America wrestle with. So it's an important one. And thanks for offering those thoughts, Nina.
Well, thanks for bringing it up.
Well, Nina, there is a lot we could say there about equity. And I know all schools are on a journey of growth, just like our students are. And I do think it's so important for people to speak out and to ruffle feathers and to rock the boat and to, be a voice for change. And so I'm happy to share those messages as well. Nina, as you look across your PLN and your own professional practice, what else is setting you on fire about education today? We've talked about assessment and equity. Is there something else that is really rocking your world right now?
Lately, I've become obsessed over collaborative inquiry and the spiral of inquiry created by Linda Kaiser and Judy Halbert. And this idea of professional learning, looking instead of learning from the expert in the front of an auditorium, that there's this opportunity given for teachers to choose to come together as a team and to collaboratively learn together. Yeah, so it's a similar idea of giving students a voice, choice, and agency. If we are learners too, I really appreciate how the collaborative inquiry model of professional learning is giving teachers as learners a choice, a voice, and a sense of agency. So that's an area I'm tapping into right now. Another thing that is super exciting is just being able to network and have dialogue with like-minded educators outside of the walls of our institutions. This year in particular, it's the very first time that I experienced this via Twitter or going to conferences where the conversations continued after the conference, and then being in a post-secondary institution, just being encouraged to get out there and network and work with others from other institutions too. So yeah, and I get fired up when I'm surrounded by colleagues who are also on fire. So I have a colleague. Her name is Jen Skelding. She gave me permission to share her name. She's on Twitter. You can find her on Twitter. And I consider her right now to be one of my edu soulmates. It is lit every time we come together to talk or collaborate. and dream about the future. And I'm just super grateful to have found colleagues like her in this space and in public spaces like Twitter as well. And another thing, there's so many things I'm on fire for. Dr. Jillian Jetson from SFU, I read her book. It's over the summer. It's called Imagination and the Engaged Learner, like cognitive tools for the classroom. And I'm super appreciative of Jillian. She and her predecessor, Kieran Egan, gives us language and structure to teach in ways that not only engage the mind, but also the emotion. And when I read it, there's just like these cognitive tools, like they're going to help learning stick and tie knots and make connections. So I'm super excited to try out some of the cognitive tools in the post-secondary setting and just to share how that affects learning in this place. So I find it like a privilege to dialogue with teachers, pre-service teachers on Twitter. I'm dialoguing with authors, I'm speaking with administrators, but there is a voice that's been missing for a year, and it's parents. Out of the K-12 system only for a year, I miss the parents and hearing their voices. And I have gained like a new appreciation for them now after reflection. And, they really matter, and they know their children in ways we are unable to as teachers. So if there is a parent out there listening to this podcast, I miss them. I miss their point of view, and I miss tapping into what they know about the learners. Yeah. Another area that is firing me up is seeing research in a new way. I always appreciated what literature has to say. I always valued making informed decision, but I always ran away from the idea of being a primary investigator. I told myself the self-talk was that I'm not good enough. That's not for me. That isn't the path for me. Telling myself I can't do it. So ironically, I'm growing a new interest and appreciation for being a researcher. I call myself an emerging researcher, and I have more of like an open disposition to like, what does that mean? What does that look like? And I'm looking forward to exploring that research this year.
I see that PhD coming, Nina. I know it's on the horizon, and I'm excited to follow along with you as you dig in. Now, I think we mentioned research at the outset. Do you know what particular questions you'll be pursuing answers to this year?
Yeah, I do. If you go to my website, I listed my curiosities in detail. But after attending this past year's Canadian Association for Teacher Education conference at Congress that UBC hosted, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I had like 5 days of learning, got a taste of every area of learning in teacher education. I left feeling so inspired by all the presenters, and I discovered where I would like to belong in the realm of research and just narrowed in my focus. So the areas I'm most interested in is like teacher education, program development, like looking at exemplary programs and learning from them, and like thinking about how will the School of Education at Trinity Western grow and like learn from that body of knowledge. I am obsessed with assessment for learning, not only in K-12, but bringing that conversation to secondary.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you would be so surprised at the conversations I have with not just school faculty members from School of Education. If I just came back from a faculty retreat, and at different meal times, if they ask, like, what do you teach? And I tell them, faculty members are intrigued. Like, what is the difference between formative and summative? And why is it a passion of yours? And what does that look like in your classroom space at Trinity Western University? So I just see a lot of opportunity for dialogue. And it's not just for me. I'm collaborating with Dr. Christine Young-Husband and Dr. Jillian Jetson this year. And we all three of us are interested in investigating that. How could we connect formative and summative assessment and post-secondary better? Like, how can we increase the value of formative assessment in this post-secondary setting?
Okay, a lot of juicy stuff there that you just dropped, Nina. I'm going to be cheering you on and checking in from time to time as we see each other through the year. Now, Nina, at the outset of her answer there, in terms of what is setting her on fire, mentioned the spiral of inquiry. And for those who are not familiar with it, the The spiral of inquiry, again, as she said, was developed by Judy, let me get this right, Linda Kaiser and Judy Halbert. Okay, I'm not mixing up their names. And they came up with a spiral that can serve as a permanent journey of learning. And it's a great way to fuel professional development within a school community. If you are an administrator looking for a great tool, then go ahead and Google the spiral of inquiry. But basically, it looks like scanning your school community, looking for strengths and weaknesses, focusing in on a problem area or an area of weakness, developing a hunch about why that is going on, learning more about the area, taking action, and then checking results. And that spiral can continue and continue. And it's just a really simple, but I would say powerful method in terms of taking action and improving outcomes and climate in your school community. Do you feel like I represented that fairly well?
Yeah, I really appreciate it because it's like this non-linear way of inquiry and learning. And I'm in the spiral right now with them. We've had 2 meetings so far. And wow, like we've gone through some of the key stages. Like there's key stages in the spiral. We've gone back and forth. The scan came from what we've learned about our students in our practice. And we have to return to the scan because we're about to teach a new group of students. And a true scan is capturing their voices. So I'm really looking forward to asking some questions to the students that I'm teaching this fall. And then we form some hunches around assessment and imaginative assessment practices. And then we have decided on our focus. And then we're currently in the stage of like the learning. And so we've kind of divvied up different topics where we're going to delve into the literature and learn before we determine what kind of actions we need to make.
That sounds like a very similar spiral to my first year of my master's degree. And I began with a scan of my students and discovered they didn't know where they were going in their learning. And I further discovered that was because I was not using learning targets or learning intentions whatsoever. And so that led to the whole spiral of focusing and developing a hunch and learning more about the area. And I like what you said about it's not linear, it's dynamic, and it forces us to engage with our learners, which it's funny that we have to say that, but I think a lot of schools have traditionally addressed professional development in this sort of static, here's what we're going to learn this year, without even looking at what is happening with their students, which is kind of silly when you say it out loud, but I think that's the way a lot of schools have gone about professional development. So the spiral of inquiry, we want to give a shout out to the networks of inquiry and Indigenous education. And again, that's Linda Kaiser and Judy Halbert, great people to follow on Twitter. I'll make sure to drop their links in the show notes. Nina, you've already talked about this coming year. Do you have a specific professional goal or an area that you're trying to improve in? I know you've recently launched your website, which is super exciting, ninapaklouis.com. Can you share with us about, I know you've got so much going on, but do you have a goal or a project that you've got in your sights for this year?
Yes. Well, like 2 words to describe my goals, I think would be bravery and courage. So, at the grad symposium at Congress, I was really challenged by others to lean in to being more transparent about my professional learning journey. So as a response to that challenge, that's why I created the website this summer. And
Yay.
although, thank you. Finally, although I don't have a whole lot of time to be a consistent blogger, my goal is to use that space as a reflective tool to grow in my writing and to be more transparent about my learning more publicly. And then I already shared how I'm embarking on research this year. So another goal of mine is to be committed to that work. And I'm really thankful to Dr. Jillian Judson from SFU and Dr. Christine Young-Husband from UNBC, who are open to collaborating with me. And so, yeah, I'm just open to that. And I'm going to be committed to that work. And like you said, for the spiral of inquiry, I'm quite an action-oriented person. So I know that I need to slow down and do the scan with my students and really delve deep into the literature before I make that action plan. So I'm really looking forward to that spiral of inquiry journey with Jillian and Christine. Yeah, just having more courage and have more bravery. That could mean writing more, blogging more. It might be submitting a proposal to a conference. It could be even more like the internal dialogue instead of telling myself that I can't do it, that I shouldn't do it, and changing that to I can do it. I will try to do it and see where it goes. Yet at the same time, protecting my well being and preserving that as well. Yeah.
Yes, yes, sanity is good.
Yeah.
I just started George Kouros's new book, Innovate Inside the Box. If I recall correctly, it was Katie Martin who said that George once met her in San Diego and she had an office full of files and research and exciting learning that she was doing, but she wasn't plugged into a PLN. And so George challenged her by asking her, how could sharing your learning help the learning of others? And from that conversation, she has expanded her PLN and begun engaging, obviously, a whole lot more with schools all over the world. And I think that's so important. I think sometimes what stops us is we feel like it's kind of pretentious, like, who am I to share my learning? But I think aside from the value we can derive from it ourselves, just in terms of reflection, there's always going to be learning that others will do as a result. And that is so exciting. So ninapaklouis.com, everyone, make sure you drop on by.
You're good at promoting. Well, another reason why I created it is I felt like a hypocrite. Last year, I had 4 sections of, initial classroom experiences. All the students created their own WordPress site as like an e-portfolio. Some of my assignments included writing a blog post as a reflection. So I was reading so many, like hundreds of blog posts written by my students. And I was thinking, wow, that's incredible, like what they've learned. And I just realized what like we are encouraging them to have a voice and take a risk in sharing their learning with others. I wasn't doing that. And so then I was challenged by that. Like now I can go in and say, I created one too. And I have more empathy for you. When you create that website, I understand how many hours it takes to learn how to use that platform. Or, writing the blog post. Wow. It's hard to get the writing process started and having all those voices tell me like, this is not good enough, or you should write about this. And it's hard. So I have more empathy for my students, but I really want to show them that I believe in sharing learning. When anyone shares with me, whether it's a presentation or a blog post or a Twitter chat, I always leave with a new nugget of knowledge or understanding. And then, yeah, I hope that place is going to be like the audience is wide, and I'm not trying to promote myself at all. It's genuinely coming from a place of here's my learning, here's my insight. If that helps you in your journey in any way, then wonderful. That's why I created it.
It's a way of modeling vulnerability because hitting that publish button is a fearful moment. And once you put it out there, it can be criticized. I was just reading that last night from Rabbi Michael Cohen in Educated by Design. I am so enjoying that book. And he calls that one of the necessities of creativity is being willing to accept critique by others, because when we hit that publish button, we will receive criticism, whatever the publish button looks like. And I think that's another barrier that we have to fight through. But good for you to model that for your learners. That is so exciting.
Well, there are so many people that modeled it before me. So I thank you and many
Awesome.
other
Thank
people
you.
for modeling it as well. Yeah, thanks.
So, Nina, let's shift gears a little bit outside of the heavy pedagogy we've been talking about. Outside of education, what's another area of learning for you? What is it that ignites your passions away from the university and really brings you alive as a human being?
Yeah, those are great questions. I don't want to start with another area of learning for me, but what does ignite or bring me alive? It's definitely my family. I don't talk a lot about my family on the public, like in Twitter. But yeah, I'm a mom to 2 young kids. I have a son who's 6. I have a daughter who is 8. My husband, he's an educator also. They are my greatest joy. Like I love spending time with them, and my children. Like if I'm attentive to who they are, what they have to say to me, they are my greatest teachers. And so, yeah, they help me come alive and be fully human. The other area of interest in learning is, like you said, it's not what makes me feel human. I'm really interested in what it means to be human. So I really enjoy reading books written by like Ken Shigemitsu, Henry Nouwen, and currently I started reading Becoming Human by John Vanier. These authors, they help me refocus my eyes to see, everyone as sacred persons and to treat everyone with love. I'm also learning how to be more still and how to escape the busy life and like how to restore my mind and my soul. For me, I find a lot of rest and restoration in nature. So just on a hike or being by a lake. Yeah, I'm just learning to unplug more often, and that to do the work well or to be the parent that I want to be, I need to unplug. And I feel that immediate impact by seeing the beauty of water or like on a hike being surrounded by greenery. Like I physically feel this immediate impact in my mind. So I'm just learning to pay attention to ways, like in that kind of space, I pay attention in ways I'm unable to when I'm at home or at school, or certain senses are heightened that are not when I'm at home or at school.
Oh, you are talking my language, Nina. Now, I think I saw pictures of you and your family recently up at Joffrey Lakes. Was that right?
Yes, we took our kids for the first time. Well, no, I took my husband and my son to Joffrey Lakes for the first time. My daughter and I hiked Joffrey Lakes when she was 5, and it is such a beautiful hike.
That's right. This is a local reference here, so not all of our listeners will resonate, but shout out to a gem of British Columbia, which is Joffrey Lakes Provincial Park. And if you're ever in the Whistler area, which was the site of the 2010 Winter Olympics, take the drive up to Joffrey Lakes and do yourself a favor. You'll come across 3 beautiful turquoise, green or blue, I guess you would say, lakes set right in the mountains, and they are stunning.
If you make it to the upper lake, you can see the runoff directly from the glacier.
Right, which is incredible.
Incredible.
Now, I am so interested in, I don't know what's coming here, but you are such a type A, or that's my observation, a go-getter, an ambitious person. So share with us about a personal habit or some kind of a productivity hack that you rely on. What contributes to your success? How do you get it all done?
Okay, honestly, I don't have a productivity hack.
Okay.
In fact, I don't see myself as a super productive person. I need other people to share their wisdom with me. Like, what are other people's productivity hacks? But if I had to share one, I do use this app. It's called Wunderlist, and it's an app on my phone, and I have different types of lists. Like I kind of categorize it by project. So I have like a list for home, a list for like various courses, a list. I even have like a wonder list for my kids. Like when they ask me questions and I don't have the answer for them, like we just put the question in one of those lists. And then, yeah, but I kind of use that app to stay organized. But like day to day, I also created my own template to stay organized at Trinity, where I really needed to I love lists, but I needed them in categories so that when I come into my office, I know I have to prioritize, like what is a priority today? And then I'll like highlight the items that I want to like focus on getting done. Yeah, that's really helped because I get distracted really easily.
Well, so do I, and that sounds like a productivity hack I need. So thank you for that one, Nina. And for those wondering, Wunderlist is spelled with a U. That's W-U, and I'll make sure to link that one up in the show notes. Just before we continue, I do want to share an important message from our friends over at the Teach Better team. Are you looking to reach more students, innovate your instruction, and teach better? Then join the Teach Better team on November 8th and 9th in Northeast Ohio for the first ever Teach Better conference. Join dynamic educators such as Dave Burgess, Tal Thompson, Adam Welcome, and more. Register now at teachbetterconference.com. And when you do, be sure to use the discount code FIRE50, that's FIRE50, to save $50 on either of the 2-day registration options. Once again, that's teachbetterconference.com. Are you ready to be better? All right, Nina, it is time for your quick picks. And here we want to know the education voices and resources resources that are shaping your practice and inspiring your thinking today. And I did make a recent stop at your blog, so I know this list is long. It's going to be tough for you to narrow this down to one or two voices, but let's start at Twitter. And I'm so excited that you're active there. Tell us about someone we should follow and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
Wow. Katie White, hands down, right now. Everything she shares inspires me. I just appreciate, she's also an author. Like, she's the author of multiple assessment texts, and you have to follow her. Like, I appreciate her holistic approach to teaching and learning. She always keeps the learner at the heart of her work, and she and others lead rich professional dialogue around assessment every other Tuesday night. If you follow her and read her books, and you can join us in that conversation through hashtag @assessment, that dialogue is for everybody.
Okay, at Assessment and Katie White. We'll make sure to include those. She's the author of Softening the Edges. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the book that I recently read by her. Mm-hmm.
Nina, point us to an ed tech tool that you currently love using in your classroom or somewhere in your professional practice. And we should note again that your classroom features students a little bit older than the K to 12 level, but I know you still use tools there. So what is really helping you?
Yeah, like two tools that I use often. I use Socrative. I learned about that tool at a former Google Apps for Education conference that I attended. And I use that EdTech tool to pose questions and collect feedback from students. So it could be like a takeaway from the class, or if it's like I just want to check conceptual understanding. What I love about this tool is I am able to collect names, like they have to submit their names. And if I want to make some of their learning visible, I could still make it anonymous. Like I could hide the names, but later on, when I want to go back and check in again, I can see who submitted the response. So then I can kind of gauge, where they're at after today's class, after a specific class. And it's also free. So I like anything free.
Absolutely. I've used that one in the past and I need to get back to it. Do you have another one you'd like to share?
I use Menti like menti.com. And there's a lot, like you can take polls, you can form word clouds, you can gain like short answers. I've used that a lot I use it a lot in some of my classes. So for example, in my curriculum design class, we're using Grant Wiggins and Jay McTeague's Understanding by Design as a resource. And students are learning how to write their own like learning targets or enduring understand, like big idea statements. And so then they would submit their drafts through the Menti anonymously. And then I kind of like splash it in front. And as a class or in small groups, we can give each other feedback, like peer feedback.
All right.
Yeah. But you know what? I used this tool in high school and it flopped.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It flopped because I like with Menti, I don't know who respond. Like I don't have a collection of who responded.
Uh-oh.
And so then, yeah, there were.
Uh-oh. Yeah, I can imagine how that would go in my 8th grade classroom. Yeah. Okay, so proceed with caution on that one. Nina, recommend a book that you've been reading lately or maybe one of your all-time faves and tell us why you recommend it.
Yeah, if you want to see a list of my recommendations around curriculum and assessment, I would suggest going to my website to take a look at that list. But if I had to choose today, one of my all-time favorites, so hard to narrow down, I would probably choose, it's called The Way of the Teacher, A Path for Personal Growth and Professional Fulfillment by Sandra, Finney, and Jane Thurgood Sagal. I don't know if I pronounced their names properly, but those are the authors. And what I love about the book, it works at several levels. Like it offers like practical suggestions for the profession to the personal and spiritual. It really focuses on inner qualities that will enrich teaching life in sustaining ways. So I struggle with sustainable practice, so I really appreciate it. When I grow weary and tired and burnt out, I return to the book over and over again. It supports and reminds me of my love for students and the joy that I have for teaching. And they insert a lot of like reflective questions that rekindle the love and the joy And it deepens my sense of what it means to be a teacher. And it brings the heart back into my teaching life when it becomes too technical, or I'm focusing too much on technique. And they offer a lot of ways to nourish the spirit as well.
Okay, that is definitely going on my Goodreads want to read list, so thank you for that. Are you a podcast listener, Nina? I hope you'll listen to this podcast, or at least this episode. Tell us about another one that you've got in your deck.
So one of the podcasts that I do listen to, it's called On Being. It's an award-winning public radio show and podcast by Krista Tippett. And they explore questions like, what does it mean to be human? How do we want to live? Who will we be to each other? Those are like their guiding questions. And they have so many fantastic guests on their show. I wish I had more time to listen more often, but if I had to recommend one, that would be one.
Last question, Nina, just for fun, what are you watching on Netflix right now?
Netflix, I'm watching The Crown. And I'm also watching The Queer Eye. I am obsessed with this show. They casted this show so well. So the hosts of the show, there's like 5 hosts, and they meet a wide variety of people, and they kind of like help them with, they kind of give fashion suggestions. They have like maybe a mini counseling session. They help like redesign their home space to make it more functional and aesthetically appealing. It's beyond what each individual has to bring to the show. It's just, I love how they like reflect on their own personal experiences that they're reminded of when they get to know the guests, like the guests that they're working with. And then there's just an exchange of like openness and like spaciousness. I can't explain it. I love that show so much. And there's like, I think I've spent many nights watching it and then ending up in tears.
Okay, well, I could probably use their help going back to school. I'm about to conduct my annual trip to the mall. All right, what are the best ways, Nina, for the listeners to follow you and share more of your learning this year?
Okay, you can follow me on Twitter at npacklui, so NPAKLUI. You can also check out my new website, www.ninapacklui.com.
Nina, I cannot say thank you enough for this conversation today. It's been so fun to engage with you. We've had so many of these in informal settings, and now we finally get to put it on the public record. And I know that was a little scary, but I'm so glad that you stepped up and accepted. So really appreciate you, appreciate your insights, and I look forward to continued learning with you. So here as summer closes, Nina, take care, have a wonderful school year, and I know we'll talk again soon.
Hey, have a wonderful year, Tim. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks for joining me today here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. For show notes and links from this episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And again, please do subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. This episode was brought to you by ClassTime.com, an assessment platform that delivers learning insights, giving you more time to teach. ClassTime helps you gain immediate visibility of your students' learning progress, build engaging lessons, share with other teachers, and create your own tech-enabled questions to complement your lesson plans. ClassTime.com also helps you engage all students with collaborative challenges and puzzles that make fun an integral part of the learning experience. Start for free at ClassTime.com today. Just before we wrap up, I'd like to recognize some of the voices who support and contribute to the Teachers on Fire community. Starting at Twitter, which is where most of my education conversations take place throughout the week, Janelle McLaughlin at ms_mac4 recently tweeted, "Finally got to listen to episode 96 with Jeffrey Frieden this morning. I have so many notes written down for deeper reflection from this episode. I also think at Burned In Teacher and at Freilich M would enjoy this one." Well, I recognize that last handle, Freilich M. Mandy was a guest several episodes back on the podcast, and I do hope the two that you mentioned Janelle tune in. I would love to have you on board. And Janelle, thank you so much for that shout out. Next, Alicia Ray at I Love Educating tweeted, "You are such an inspiration. I was honored to be on your show. Thank you for being such an amazing advocate and sharing stories worldwide. You are appreciated. Honored to be listed with these two rock stars." Well, you're making me blush, Alicia, but I really, really appreciate that fun shout out. And she was referring to a tweet that I made of the 3 librarians I've featured on the show so far. And they would be Alicia herself, Jennifer Cassatod, and Jamie Osborne. If you are a librarian or you are connected with one, make sure you point them toward the shows that I just mentioned: Alicia Ray, Jennifer Cassatod, and Jamie Osborne. Next, Ryan Coop at rcoop7 tweeted, "Another awesome episode at Teachers on Fire. Over the last year, I too have often wondered if I was sharing too much with my colleagues. At Mr. KV, thanks for encouraging me to grow my PLN. At Make Them Master It, I am excited to dig into some of the English content you have created." And Ryan was speaking directly to my last episode with Jeffrey Frieden again. And Jeffrey tackled this problem of, for those of us that are keeners or we're enthusiasts or we're just excited about pedagogical principles and new technology and new resources and new ways of doing things, how much do we share with our colleagues without driving them crazy? It was a good discussion. Make sure you catch it if you have not yet. That's in episode 96. So thank you so much for the encouragement, Janelle, Alicia, and Ryan. And I need to point out, Ryan is a good personal friend. You 3 were the fuel to my fire this week, and I'm so thankful to have your support. Over on YouTube, I want to shout out Danny Hogger from the Inspiring Teachers channel, who left this comment on my last episode with Jeffrey Frieden. "Stellar episode. Jeffrey is an inspiring teacher, and I enjoyed the storytelling segment especially." Well, I just mentioned that episode, but another part of it from Jeffrey's conversation was a story he shared about a time when he thought he was doing the right thing with a neighbor's class and then was called out later by a colleague, and the calling out was loud enough for others in the building to hear. Quite a story, but best of all, I know you'll appreciate the lessons that Jeffrey drew from that experience. Thank you again to Danny for that great comment. And if you surf on over to his channel on YouTube, you'll see an interview with yours truly. It's not the background. I don't operate from a professional studio, but I did chat with Danny this week, and you'll find it there on YouTube. I hope by now that if you're an education blogger or reader of education blogs, you've heard about the Teacher Blogs podcast, a podcast for teachers who have more time to listen to blog posts than to read them. The mission of this podcast is to amplify the voices of education writers that are seen, read, but need to be heard. Last week's episodes featured posts from Lynn Thomas at TomLynn101 called H is for Happy, and another one from Rose Pillay at RosePillay1 called To See or Not to See. Both were great posts, and as always, I really, really enjoy hearing these posts read by the authors themselves. Now, my mission there at the Teacher Blogs podcast is to publish Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I actually missed Friday this week, and so that can be attributed to my push right now to try to make a little more progress on my master's thesis. Full admission, I completely forgot about posting, but that is my goal, to publish Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so make sure you tune into the Teacher Blogs podcast. It's another great way to maybe catch some of the blog posts that you don't always have time to read. And if you are a blogger, your voice could be next. All you need to do is use your phone's voice memo app to record yourself reading your own blog post. Then use that share button to email the voice file to teacherblogspodcast@gmail.com. If you've written a blog post that you'd like me to consider featuring here, please message me at teacher_blogs on Twitter for more information. Well, on the topic of blogs, I continue to be excited by what is happening at the Teachers on Fire magazine over on Medium. This week we featured a few pieces, one called Rebounding 101 by Justin Belt, and that was a heartfelt piece about what happens when when the first week of school doesn't go or feel exactly how you envisioned it? How do you come back from that? And how do you rediscover your why and your deep moral purpose in that process? Another fun one from Tammy Breitweiser, our newest author, called Self-Care is Not Chocolate, It's Reading. And I'm with you on that one, Tammy. Although I do like chocolate more than my wife does. What I Do in the First Week of School was a great article by Caitlin Giordano. And Caitlin, just a phenomenal writer, never miss her articles. And one more from Tammy Breitweiser, Writing Life versus Teacher Coach Life. And so if you are in that unique position of sort of balancing your personal and your professional life and some of the activities that overlap between the two, check out that one. Again, a second piece by Tammy Breitweiser. The Teachers on Fire magazine is a Medium publication, and if you're wondering where Medium is, you'll find it at medium.com or on the Medium app. If you're already an education blogger, consider joining our growing writing team there. You can continue to publish content on your own blog, and you keep full credit and ownership of your content on Medium. Message me at Teachers on Fire or really on any social media platform for more details. And if you would like to get started, the first thing I will ask you to do is create your own Medium account. Well, on a different note, just to keep you on your toes, I want to share a bit of a treat. If you enjoyed the thoughts on assessment shared by my guest today, Nina Pack-Louie, check out these clips shared this week on Voxer by my friend Aaron Blackwelder, former guest of the Teachers on Fire podcast.
Grades are a currency in our culture that buy respect from people, they buy college admission, they buy cheaper car insurance. They're a currency, and this is the problem with grades, period, is that I want to acknowledge a kid's effort. I want to acknowledge how hard he's worked or how often he's screwed around. And I completely agree. Is that should that be rewarded in a currency? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But in our culture, I mean, we live in what we believe is a meritocracy, but we're not a meritocracy. My kids are going to have much more access to opportunities in this world than my students of poverty, and even more of that than my students of color who are in poverty, and students who are of equal socioeconomics that are students of color. That is not a meritocracy. That is white supremacy. So, yeah, this is the whole problem with grades, is that they are a currency that tell us who is better and who is not. And I do kind of lean more towards standards-based grading, and I do believe that what we do is we can use rubrics to report how students are doing. But in my opinion, I think that the only thing we report out, that we give to parents, is the language that's describing their child only. We do not give them the comparatives of, well, your child is sitting here at level 2, and this is the language that describes them. But here's also the language of 1, 3, and 4. We only give them the words that describe their child. And yes, effort matters. Effort matters more than anything else. Why should a child come to school and this is just easy and they could take tests and get A's? That is the elephant in the room, is grades. It's not a matter, do we give a grade for effort, or do we only grade the ability to meet the content standards? Do we grade it all? Or do we just report how the child's doing? And that is the ultimate problem.
Well, I hope you enjoyed those thoughts from Aaron. If you did, make sure to follow WEL1 and visit teachersgoinggradeless.com to learn more about what he is all about. I've really enjoyed chatting with him over the last few weeks about going gradeless and rethinking assessment, just a topic that never seems to go away. As you head into your week, Teachers on Fire, I want to leave you with this great quote from Balance Like a Pirate, authored by Sarah Johnson, Jessica Johnson, and Jessica Cabine. They write, "As educators, you need to model for your students that you are actually lifelong learners. You don't hold all the knowledge to impart to them, gasp, and you have as much to learn as you have to teach." Again, I'm your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you decided to spend some of your day listening to this podcast. I hope that in some way the content shared by Nina Pack-Louis today ignited your thinking and inspired your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Take care and have a wonderful week.